My name is Paul Van Ginkel. I've been a fine art painter for 40 years. I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba in 1960. My mom and dad had 5 kids, and we moved to Calgary, Alberta in 1973. When I was in high school, of course, at that time in our lives, we all kind of wonder what we're going to do with the rest of our lives and what career path we want to take. My father wanted me to go into his construction business, like my older brother, and my younger brother was thinking about that as well. But it was the art thing that really resonated with me. I was an average student, but I really loved it. So I found out about the Alberta College of Art. Right now it's called the Alberta University of the Arts. So I went there, I was accepted. I went there in 1979. In my first year of general studies, the objective is to try a lot of different things and apply for your major area the following year. Well, my grades actually were not good enough to get into my major area, which was visual communications. So I considered dropping out and working for my father. But the counselor at the school encouraged me to stay on and take some general studies for my second year and apply for a direct entry into my major area, of which I did. So essentially I was on a 5-year program, but in my 5th year, I applied for a job at the Calgary Herald newspaper as an editorial illustrator, and I got that job. So I worked there for about 6.5 years as an illustrator, illustrating stories primarily, also doing some informational graphics and charts and so on, breaking news stories. But it was the illustrations that I was specialized in. Probably did about 1,000 illustrations and graphics and so on that were published in the paper. So it was always a thrill and a real challenge working for the newspaper because of the tight deadlines and working with editors and writers and so on. But effective January 1st, 1990, I resigned from the Herald, and I've been a full-time fine art painter ever since. I specialize in Western work, but I do other subjects as well, primarily dance themes, flamenco, ballet, some burlesque. I also do portraits. I do figurative work, scenes from my travels. I travel extensively. I do a lot of custom pieces as well, commission works. Right now we're in my office at my Calgary studio. And in the office right behind me, there's a lot of personal drawings and paintings that I've kept over the years that are significant to me. For example, this drawing over here of the tree, that's what I consider to be my best drawing in high school in 1978. This drawing of these rock stars, ink drawing I did at the Alberta College of Art in 1980. Some various other ones, including 3 illustrations that were published in the Calgary Herald, just to show you the kind of stuff that I did. So even back then, I was frankly skilled in a lot of different mediums and techniques. Like a lot of these are realistic and airbrush and so on. But it's the Western work that I love. A lot of people ask me, why do I do the Western work? Is it just because you're in Calgary with the Calgary Stampede? I mean, that's part of it. But I remember exactly what happened. When we were still living in Winnipeg, we took a family vacation to the Great Calgary Stampede, the greatest outdoor show on earth, in 1970. I was 10 years old. And right away when I saw the rodeo and the chuck wagon races, and especially the First Nations dancing and their encampment, I was actually mesmerized and enthralled and hooked on cowboys and Indians. The cowboys were so strong and brave and cool looking, and they had the hats and all that, and working with the livestock and the horses and so on was just incredible. But also with the First Nations, especially going to the powwow. It was back then and it remains to this day just a full assault on my senses, from the sounds and the dancing and the color and the music was just so gorgeous. And I'm still painting all those images to this day. The Calgary Stampede, largely because of that first experience, has become absolutely instrumental in the shaping of my career. I just love being there. And I was, through the Stampede, I was the first fine artist chosen to paint the annual Stampede poster in 2007. I say fine artist because prior to that, it was always done as a commercial illustration through an advertising agency. But they wanted to change that up dramatically, so they selected me, and I'm honored to have that opportunity. So currently I'm working on as I mentioned, my 20th Stampede exhibition. So what we'll do perhaps is walk over to my studio and I'll show you some of those paintings. Well, we just came from my studio office next door. Now we're in my studio. Like studios or offices for all of us, they have to be set up just for us. They're so specific. In my case, it has to feel right. I also fill my studio with not just art supplies and paintings, but artifacts, things that I call energy and spiritual elements, including First Nations artifacts, old saddles, skulls, and so on. So I feel that I'm enveloped in a wonderful creative environment, which is safe and inspires me to create my best work. Right now I'm in front of my easel. This was a custom-made easel for me, and it works on a counter-weight system. Depending on the weight of the painting on the easel, I put some weight on the back, and it goes up and down just with one finger. And when I paint standing up, and I kind of plant myself almost like in a cockpit, if you will, where everything is right in front of me. I just grab my brushes right here, and I usually paint, around eye level, a little lower. So if I'm working on this chief's nose, I go lower or higher. My setup every morning is identical. I have these disposable palettes, and what I do is I've got boxes and boxes of oil paints. I use the same oil paint brand. I've used the same brand for many, many years. And what I do is I set up the same 15 colors every morning in the same order, and I lay them down, very generously. I squirt all the different colors on my palette, and what I do is I mix in what I call my soup, which is sort of a combination of linseed oil and liquid. Liquid is a drying device because I work in oils, and I just kind of lay it in there all around my entire palette, and I just kind of mix my paint, and I mix it to a consistency that just kind of feels right, and I know that from experience. It kind of sets me up that when I dive one of my brushes into the paint, I have a pretty good idea of how it's gonna react to the canvas. Setup, as I mentioned, is identical. It's kind of systematic, but the creative process is fluid, and that's where the fun begins. Part of my working method is to listen to music. So when I start painting in the morning, I put in my AirPods, and I just shut all the external noise out of my existence, and I just get into a zone, I get into a rhythm. The kind of music that I choose is always deliberate, very deliberate, in accordance when I'm painting, the kind of mood I want, the energy. It may be like a quiet, if I'm doing a detailed piece or a portrait, I may choose like a Hans Zimmer soundtrack or some First Nations flute music. If I want to do like a very energetic, large stallion painting with lots of expression, I may listen to Eminem or something. So it's all very, very deliberate. And that's instrumental in my work, is the music that I choose. I love music at least as much as visual art, if not more. Not to imply I couldn't paint without music, but I would feel very, very different. And not to imply I get distracted easily, because I'm very focused on my work. But the music, especially locked into my ears, just really, really enhances that experience. And I think elevates my work. I think it truly does. Some collectors who are aware of that, they ask me what music I was listening to when I did their painting. So I think that's really neat. Another thing that I do as well is I take progress photographs of my work, just for my own education, if you will, but also record a record of them, because again, sometimes collectors would like to see that information, and I'll be pretty generous showing that work. Even though I have a preconceived idea of what I want to do or say or the style I want for a painting, I also allow the painting to kind of dictate to me what it wants to be. So I start painting, and it's kind of like a yin-yang. You do something here, something happens over there. I often describe myself as like a conductor, and I've got an orchestra that I'm trying to compose into beautiful music. So what I do also is with each canvas, I do a light drawing, pencil drawing, to kind of compose the image. And then I fix that with spray fixative so that it doesn't disappear. And I do a light wash over the entire canvas, so I'm not painting directly onto white. And then I begin the painting. I only work on one painting at one time, so it has my full attention. And part of that too is because each painting has a rhythm or a language or a style, so it's important for me to keep with that. Most of my work also is on a large scale because I feel that the subjects command a larger format, again with the First Nations warriors and so on. A lot of the equine paintings that I do, sometimes I have 165 horses in one composition, so that has to be on a larger scale as well. And I paint standing up, and I kind of walk back and forth just to make sure that everything looks good and so on. And then once that painting is done, I put it aside and move on to the next piece. My Stampede exhibition this year is focused on warriors and First Nations and so on, and that'll be sort of the theme of it. The number one question that's asked of me is, how long does it take you to do a painting? So even though the actual execution may take X amount of time, maybe 8 hours or whatever, sometimes I think about that painting and prepare for it for weeks, months, sometimes even years. I've done some paintings that I thought about for 20 years. So, time is kind of irrelevant in a sense. To me, my objective as a painter is equal parts aesthetically pleasing, but also accurate. But one thing I also try to do with my work is, because it's expressive and loose and so on, I'm trying to engage the viewer to kind of finish the painting themselves. So I'm not going to give you every single detail. I'm just going to sort of, inspire you to look at the piece and kind of finish it off yourself, if you will. To me, it almost says more about somebody acquiring a painting than the artists themselves creating it. Because somebody steps up and says, I love that painting, I would like to buy it, I want to have it in my space and in my home for the rest of my life, and then I'll pass it on to someone else. So that's really, really kind of heady stuff to absorb, really. And it's a real privilege. And there's no reason why one of my paintings or paintings created today can last 600, 700 years. You can go into a museum and see the masterpieces that were created that long ago with inferior materials. So if paintings are kept, they can go through generations and generations of an impact on people. I've created close to 2,000 paintings. I try to keep track on who owns those paintings and if they change hands, because I care. They're almost like my kids, and I want to know where they are if I can, the kind of impact they may have, and all that stuff is very, very important to me. People acquire paintings to show a reflection of themselves primarily. We may stand in front of a painting and we may literally say, what it is and so on, but what it means to us is different relative to who we are, our history, and so on. So paintings are like triggers into one's imagination, but also their history. So people will acquire objects, including paintings, to show a side of them. And I like to think that my paintings do more than just kind of decorate, as good as that is. They strike conversation. And again, they show a side of the owner, of the collector. Every painting I do as well brings on a new life experience for me. I mean, even though I have collectors, and some collectors have 20, 30 paintings, literally. I often meet somebody new. We kind of have that in common, that they admire my work and they acquire. So I also establish a new friendship and a relationship with that particular collector. And it's a direct result of that painting. And so that, that's not lost on me, the privilege of having that experience and the impact of that. So it's really, really quite exciting for me. Every show I do, and especially at the Stampede, I have usually about 15 or 20 paintings, and I usually incorporate one or two pieces that I find to be, new and different, and almost like experimenting with how they're received in the public. In my show last year, I had a very large, very intense First Nations warrior. It was dark, it was moody, it was extremely arresting, and across the board, it just had tremendous reaction because it was just so moving and powerful. And I believe what that was, sure, it was a reflection on the painting itself, but it was mainly the viewer was feeling something perhaps they haven't felt before because of the intensity of the image. From little boys running up to it and having fun, kind of dodging from the painting, to seasoned collectors and others, women, men, all ages. So I thought, well, that's tremendous. That really taught me something. So a lot of these paintings this year have that kind of feel and that courage, eye contact, the intensity of this particular warrior. And even though every painting I do has fun aspects to it, I really enjoy doing these type of paintings because they're so loose and spontaneous. And I've discovered with this type of image, I just have tremendous liberty. This portrait as well of Geronimo. Again, scale is very, very important. A few people have seen this painting so far, but they first saw it on a computer or on their phone, and they just can't believe the energy and the presence the painting has when you step up and see the original. I remember when I was in art school, it's all very well and good to study the masters, but until you stand in front of a Rembrandt and feel the scale of it and see how he puts a highlight on his nose, you just never know. Another painting over here too, which is going to be in the exhibition, has a similar feel. So one thing I try to do also with my pieces, as you can see, is just have realistic areas surrounded by very, very expressive line marking and texture and so on. And it just kind of enhances the whole experience. The first Calgary Stampede was in 1912, and this year the Stampede is celebrating 100 years of chuck wagon racing. The Stampede has a lot of moving parts. It's a big event. There's lots of different components to it. The midway, an art show, all kinds of different competitions from blacksmith to First Nations. But it's anchored in the rodeo and the chuck wagon racing, especially the chuck wagon racing. For the longest time, it was a 4-wagon race with 4 outriders. Then they cut that back to a 4-wagon race with 2 outriders to make it more safe. And last year, actually, it was cut back to 3 wagons with 2 outriders per wagon for it to be more safe. So the Stampede wanted to recognize this milestone and create a mural. So I was one of the artists that they contacted to discuss it. I had a meeting in my studio here back in January with a couple of committee members, and we were brainstorming about the idea. They gauged my interest, and of course I would have been honored to proceed with the mural and the assignment, and I was pleased to be part of that conversation. So we were talking about different ways we could do it. One way, the obvious way, is to paint directly on the wall, because the end use of the mural was going to be reproduced on one of the buildings on the Stampede grounds. So that was one way. Another way was for me to paint panels in my studio and have those assembled. But I said, if you want me and if you want the best of my ability, because I'm a studio painter, I would prefer to do the painting here in the studio. So they said that's fine. Last year, however, I created what I consider to be the quintessential chuck wagon painting. I did a lot of research, and I sourced a couple of references that showed a race with the 4 wagons, outriders on the turn, had the energy and the vitality of that particular race, and I created that piece for my Stampede show last year. So that painting was actually in my studio when I was having this meeting, so I kind of pointed to it. I said, what about that painting? They said, we like it, looks good, but now it's a 3-wagon race. So your painting has 4 wagons. So I'm not sure we can kind of get away with that, because even though we want to celebrate the history of Stampede racing, which is primarily 4 wagons, now it's a 3-wagon race. So I said, well, how about if I paint out one of the wagons? So it's a 3-wagon race. So they said, well, that's interesting. We can perhaps consider that. I said, what I'll do is I'll do this. I'll paint out the 4th wagon. I'll kind of dust it out so you don't see it at first glance. So when somebody walks up to this painting, they'll see that it's obviously a 3-wagon race. There's an outrider there as well. But upon closer examination, they'll see the 4th wagon, but they won't see it right away. And everyone, to a person who has seen this painting, doesn't see the 4th wagon right away, and that's the intent. And so once they see it, the 4th wagon, there's that extra kind of appeal and excitement because they've discovered something. And once you see that wagon, you see that all the information is there. There's the cowboy, there's the horse, there's the wagon, there's an outrider back there as well. So the Stampede owns this painting, but it's also reproduced in a 16 by 28 foot mural, which is currently installed on the Nutrien building on the Stampede grounds. Even though I'm very happy and satisfied with my ability to paint, what I'm most proud of by far is my business acumen and the fact that I've been able to turn my passion as an artist into a small business. And you have to see value in your work, and you have to package it effectively and promote it effectively. We all know there are countless extremely talented artists out there who are painters, musicians, dancers, writers, who kind of starve, if you will, and they just can't make it in the business. And it's not a lack of talent, it's a lack of a focus on and discipline to operate as a business. And I focus on that a lot. For example, when I go to the studio every morning, even though I wish I could just paint all day, the first few hours in the morning are spent on business. Social media, I post on all platforms. I don't feel like doing it, but I do it because it's necessary. I follow up on all kinds of leads and expressions of interest. I do all that because it's part of my routine and also clears my head so I can just focus on my painting in the afternoon. I've certainly had a fortunate and blessed life and career. But like anyone, I've had setbacks. There's a history of cancer in my family. My father died of brain cancer in 2002. He was only 68. My mother died of esophageal cancer in 2008. She was only 71. And my sister, my older sister, Deborah, died of cancer, lung cancer, when she was only 50. I was struck with cancer as well. In 2009, I was diagnosed with malignant melanoma. Certainly shocking, no one wants to receive that call from their doctor saying that they have cancer. So as a result, I had a year of chemotherapy, no radiation, but chemotherapy. There was a month I spent going to the Tom Baker Cancer Center to get injections, and then 11 months of self-injections. You never get used to doing that, knowing full well you're going to inject yourself with chemo and go through the pain and suffering that endured. So as a result, I didn't paint for a year. At least I didn't have my regular painting schedule. I did, however, paint 2 paintings. One I just had to get done because it was a commission that I was committed to, so I painted that. And also I painted a portrait of our daughter, Isabella, because when Isabella was born in 2006, my wife Kristen and I decided that I would paint Isabella's portrait every year for Kristen's birthday. So I was committed to doing that. And again, when I was diagnosed with my cancer, Isabella wasn't even 3 years old. So that was pretty shocking, but I looked at her in the eyes and I told her that Daddy's gonna beat this. So those are the only 2 paintings I did. Interesting too, because it's usually the caregivers that kind of work harder than the patients. Sure, I was suffering through my ordeal, but it was my wife Kristen who was my hero, and she took care of everything while we were going through that. So that was pretty brutal. But once I got my diagnosis, there was about a 6-month period before I started my treatments. So I continued to paint, but that series was very dark and moody and kind of aggressive, a reflection of my state of mind at that time. It was about 12 paintings I did of First Nations warriors and portraits. But again, the technique and the subject was very, very dark and moody. That was sort of the period that I went through. But happy to report that, unless I'm told otherwise, I'm cancer-free, and it's now over 10 years, and I couldn't feel better. Part of my advice is just to have a routine, regardless of external influences and what's going on. Just have the same routine, do the same thing over and over again. In the unknown, anything can happen or nothing can happen, but it's usually a direct result of your efforts. One of the most important things with any product is pricing, how to set a price. I mean, there are no specific guidelines for that. A lot of it for me, in a way, is kind of feel. When I started out my career, I used to price paintings, in accordance to size or whatever, and set up that kind of system. But now, and it's not, I don't price paintings by how much time I spent on them. Now, because I've been in the business, so long, that I have a pretty good sense of demand for a particular painting on the marketplace. And a lot of it is precedent. So I can charge X for a painting, and that could be supported by the fact that similar paintings like that have sold in the past for that price. So that's a real tough consideration as well, what the price you work for. I mean, you want to sell it, you don't want to underprice it, you want to put good value into it, so that's very important. Another thing I do is I try to leverage not just opportunities, but particular paintings. So when a painting is sold, it doesn't mean that's the end of the life of that painting, it's the beginning of the life. And so I'll promote the fact that a painting is sold, what collection it may be gone in. It may inspire commissions down the road. So it's important to recognize opportunities. And we all have opportunities. We all have things that come our way, leads and tips and so on, advice. Not all of us take advantage of those, but I do. And it doesn't mean I get everything I go after. I mean, my entire career, I've gone after almost everything, like opportunities to show my work, follow up with people. Do I get everything? Of course not. But I always get my little piece of the pie. I never get the whole pie, but my efforts always yield a piece. If I got the whole pie, I may not have an appetite anymore. So it's good to stay hungry and keep on going after it. And that's what I do. The number one thing for me anyways is just to remain optimistic and positive. Because again, you don't know what's going to happen. And you can't exude that energy, because for a painter, if you're down and you're uninspired, it's going to be reflected in the work. And it all comes down to work. Kind of everything I have in my life, for the most part, honestly, is a direct result of my work. With that too, I mean, I'm 63 years old, I've been doing this for 40 years. I honestly feel I'm in mid-career. So many artists in all disciplines, they really get in their groove in their 60s and 70s. And if you're ever going to be great at anything, you need to have decades of experience behind that. Why would I retire? Why would I retire all that wisdom and experience and opportunity and not leverage it into greater things? When I drive to the studio every morning, I still have butterflies in my stomach. I'm just so inspired, and because anything can happen. And I honestly feel that my best work is ahead of me. I'm getting better and better as a painter and a person, and I remain extremely ambitious, and I look forward to opportunities that may present. I'm always open to talking to any artist. I have a master's degree, and with that I could teach at a college level, but I choose not to because I'm too busy teaching myself. But I'm always open to giving advice to any aspiring artist, of which I do on a regular basis. And you know what? I don't care about how good their art is or not. If they're passionate and committed, I'll have the time for them, and I'll try to help them as best I can. Because to be an artist can be a lonely existence, because you work in isolation for the most part. There's lots of struggles, there's lots of ups and downs, highs and lows. But it's almost like it's a calling that artists have that you have to follow. And I have, and I feel extremely fortunate. And I'm very grateful for collectors and patrons who have stepped up and supported me to enable me to continue with my life journey. Historically, if it wasn't for the popes and the kings and the patrons in centuries past, we wouldn't have the masterpieces that we enjoy to this day. So it's my support network, my collectors, that give me the fuel and the coal in my engine to keep working. When I sign the painting, that represents the completion of that piece and the best I can do in that moment in time. And then it goes on into an unknown world and universe. It goes on to an unknown future.